Well, in our family, like I told you, there were 6 of us, and the 3 younger ones I was the oldest of the 3 younger ones. And my older brother was 15 when I was, say, 4 years old. And he had a bicycle. And he used to take the 3 of us on that bicycle together. One on the handlebars, one on the parcel carrier, and me on the bar. And one of the times, on one occasion, my toes got caught in the spokes of the bicycle wheel. There was no permanent damage because he stopped right away. But I was carried around by my siblings for several days. I never forgot that. Another thing, we did not have electricity or running water, so my sister and I were assigned to doing the dishes. And we couldn't reach the cupboard, so a bench was put there, so we stood on this bench, and Mum would get a pan of hot water, and one of us would wash the dishes and the other one would dry the dishes. That was our main job. We also had to dust, of course, on the days that the cleaning was done. Our job was to do the dusting. Then when I was 12 years old and my sister was 10, Mr. Freddie Patterson had a milk business. They had cows and they produced the milk and delivered it to the people in town. And so Mrs. Stella, we called her, hired my sister and I to wash milk bottles. That's as far as you could go. If you wanted to go beyond grade 10, you had to leave Gaspé. So we couldn't leave Gaspé. Our parents couldn't send us away. So I had to get a job. So my first job was at Battery Park Hotel as a waitress. I hated that job with a passion. I just couldn't accept that job. I stayed there for about 2 months. And in that period of time, I found out that Russell Keyes' secretary, which was Doreen Eden, was getting married. So I applied for a job there. Got a phone call. My mom got a phone call. Mr. Keyes wanted me to go for an interview. So I left Battery Park, walked up to Mr. Keyes' office, which was behind his house at the time, and had my interview. I had no experience, just my grade 10. He hired me, $45 a month. But I took the job. I was taught bookkeeping on the job. Had to learn to type. I did everything. And I stayed there for over 7 years. And it was just my thing to do that bookkeeping. But I lived in Waco, which was 4 miles from Gaspé. So in the summertime, I drove a bicycle to get to work. In the wintertime, I walked 4 miles. And I had to walk. I had to be to work at 8 o'clock and work till 5 o'clock, and had to work Saturday mornings, half a day. And sometimes in the winter, I would get a drive with the mailman. He would be going down the road with his horse, and he had left Gracum Post Office, but he had to let me out at Gaspé Harbour Post Office because he had to go up there and get the mail.
Gaspé West.
Gaspé West.
Not Harbour.
Okay, Gaspé West. And then he would often go out on the ice to go the rest of the way to Gaspé.
Where was the post office in Waco?
Mrs. Frank Patterson. First it was Mr. Case, Lauren Case's mother.
Okay.
And then the last was Mrs. Frank Patterson, Mrs. Mighty we called her. The mother of Alec and Keith and Ted.
Ah, okay.
And then there was another post office at Shirley's.
Beshervy's had the Melvin Beshervy had the post office in Gaspé West.
Yeah.
Gaspé West.
Yep, there was 2 post offices in Wakem. And that Mrs. Mighty's post office was the last one before Rural Route. Before Rural Route, she was the last one. Because I always thought that I'd like to work in a post office. And I used to think that when she quit, maybe I could get the post office. But it went to Rural Route.
Didn't work out.
Didn't work out. Anyway, I went to Key's office and I stayed there till the year we got married, 52. He was going to have this store and he wanted me to quit my job and work in his store. Well, not work in the store, do the book work. So I did. My dad was the same as his dad.
Okay.
They had seasonal jobs. He worked on the river guiding the sports in the summer, and the last year or 2 that he was there, he drove the Jeep and took the supplies in. So he used to come out every day in this Jeep and he'd stop at home and he'd take his grandchildren, which was some of my children and my sister's children. He'd take a couple of them to town with him and they would have fun on Davis's wharf while he was in Davis's store getting the supplies. So they really liked that. And that was one of his jobs. In the winter time, he cut his own wood and probably, well, before that, before I was born, my dad had a job in the winter time in the woods as a contractor, I think you call it. He hired other people, and my mother lived in there with him, and she was the cook. And her pay was being able to live there and being found, like Dana says. That was her pay. And she had her 2 oldest boys living in there with her. And they loved that, especially the oldest one. He thought that was wonderful because he set rabbit snares and, you know, he lived in the woods and he just thought that was wonderful.
Now, what was his name?
Cecil.
Cecil.
Yeah, Cecil was the oldest one and he was in the army, and Brian was the second one and he was in the Air Force. And they're both dead, of course, because Cecil would be over 100. He was born 1918, and Brian was born in 1921, I think it was. So my 3 older, and Mona's dead, of course. She's been dead quite a while.
My brothers, they were a couple of years, 3 or 4 years older than I. When they started to work, they actually went sailing. A lot of our boys at that age they went sailing on the lake boats in
On the Great Lakes?
Great Lakes,
Yeah.
and St. Lawrence River. And my oldest brother, well, my one next to me, joined the Air Force I think he joined the Air Force in 51. Well, was there a war started in 51?
Korea. 51 to 53.
That's the one. He stayed there for 25 years. Then he worked in in Vancouver at the airport as a mechanic. And my other brother worked as a sailor, and he got to be a captain on one of those lake ships. And then he left there and moved to British Columbia, and he got, I think he worked as I don't know what it was that he started at, but he ended up to be a captain of one of those ferries from Vancouver to Nanaimo. And he spent the rest of his life in the Nine. But that's what a lot of our people did. They had to move on to get work sometime. And at Marg's father's time, a lot of the people went west to work on the harvest.
Yeah. Some of Daddy's cousins did.
Yes, they went to work on the harvest, and some of them went to northern U.S. to work in the lumber camps, chopping wood with an axe. At that time, they chopped it with an axe. But we've been moving. The ones that wanted to work had to move to get work.
We did leave Gaspé. We went to Montreal for a few months, but we were very unhappy in Montreal. So I had a phone call from the chairman of the school board of Gaspé asking me if I would come back and take the job as secretary treasurer. I said, yes, I surely will. So we moved back to Gaspé. I took the job and I was there for over 30 years.
Okay.
And when I started there, it was just the Protestant school municipality of Gaspé. In 1970, that was in 61, in 1970, they amalgamated 8 school boards into one and became the School Board of Gaspé. And I was chosen to be the Secretary General of that school board. And there's a funny thing. There was a gentleman, a businessman in town, that used to see me every morning at the post office. He would go to the post office before he went to his job. It was Paula Coovey. And I would go to pick up my mail before I went to my job. And he was very amused at me being Secretary General. And he was a tall man, and of course I'm short, and he would bow like this at me. Good morning, Mrs. Secretary General.
Proper thing.
He did that so many times in Gaspé Post Office. Anyway, I got that job and I worked alone, just me. And there was a few times that the school board hired somebody to help me for a few months. I think I had one girl for maybe a year or so, but all the rest of the time it was a one-person job.
I must tell you about our traveling to Murdochville.
Okay.
We had all kinds of experiences, and we even used to go early in the winter to see how many rabbits we could count. And
Well, you pooled your cars.
we pulled the cars. I'd take my car once a week. And I was fortunate enough that I could get in the car and fall asleep.
When you weren't driving.
When I wasn't driving. One time I did fall asleep driving, and I scraped the car all along a hydro pole, if you please, ruined the car. Lucky I didn't ruin myself. But one time we were coming out from Murdochville, and we got to York Lake Bridge, and there was an elephant in the middle of the road.
An elephant.
Now we used to see bears, we'd see moose, we'd see rabbits, lynx, all kinds of things. But this is the first time we saw an elephant. And what happened was there was a carnival coming into Gaspé, and they stopped there to water the animals. And the elephant was in the middle of the road. And we there was 5 of us in the car at all times, and we stopped and pushed people out of ditches and just, we did all kinds of things on the way in and out. And we had washouts from bridges and fire at the ammunition dump. I had to go around by Fox River and Osprey and back that way, back into Morrockville. There's times I didn't get to work till 10 o'clock, but I only missed one day because of a snowstorm. Mind you, the snowstorms mostly arrived on the weekends, so I didn't have to go to work on the weekends. I was just a day shift, and but I missed one day. I couldn't get to Morlockville.
And do you have memories of that festival? Do you have some vivid memories?
Yes, for sure. There was wonderful memories because they had breakfast every year. They had suppers. They had boat races. They had parades. They had anything you could mention. They had all kinds of competitions for different things. They used to have dog shows. They had what else did they have?
Talent shows.
Yes, talent shows.
Mr. Edgar Cool did the Price is Right thing there. He was like Bob Barker.
Yeah.
And,
it was one of the bigger festivals that the Gaspé Coast has seen.
and they got somebody from like Charlie Pride and people like that. They got every year. They got somebody. And when I remember when Charlie Pride was there, the crowd was just, the place was just filled with people, and they just kept encoring and encoring, and that man just kept on singing. He just sang and sang and sang.
To be honest.
You know, the people wanted him, and he just kept on. They used to have fiddling contests too. Remember Harris Mullen used to play the fiddle?
That's right.
They had fiddling contests. Our son Tony, he was going to school in Montreal at the time, and he decided that he was going to, when his school finished, he worked in Montreal for a while for Gary Tuzo, and then he decided he was going to drive home on a bicycle. So he put his suitcase send it by the train.
CN Express.
CN Express, and he sent something in the mail, and he got on his bicycle, and he drove home in 5 days, and he was home before the suitcase and before the mail. He got home. And he was coming out from Murdochville. It was his last lap, and Dennis and them were coming from work, and they stopped and offered to pick him up. And he said, "No way, I've driven from Montreal, I'm not being picked up." So he drove all 5 days come from Montreal.
And when did you get married? What year?
1952, August 19.
And how did you two meet?
Oh, we knew each other from going to school. And he tells me now, or he told me after, he said, "I had my eye on you long before I asked you."
In primary school.
She was a nice girl. She was polite. She was a very bright girl in school, and she wasn't you know, she was a sensible girl. So yes, I did have my eye on her, and when I come out of after I come out of the woods, there was I think it was the first dance after winter.
Easter Monday was the first dance.
I danced with her, and I asked her if I could walk her home. Of course, didn't have a car or bicycle or nothing, and she said yes. And I was lucky. There was 2 other girls with you, I think, and they had the 3 couples walked home together, and we had electric lights at that time. And I remember we got in the kitchen, and well, they turned the lights on, of course, but one of the guys turned the lights off. And I grabbed her and kissed her,
Oh dear.
and she kissed me back. So that was the start of it. Then I kept going, we kept together from then on.
Our family was big into music. Our oldest brother, Cecil, he played the fiddle, the accordion, and the mouth organ. Mum played the mouth organ, and she sang. Mona played the accordion. Mona and Brian danced steps. Every evening before our boys went to war, joined the services, every evening we had music, our own music, and we had a little dog, Teddy, and Teddy would sing all the time. He would sing too. So we grew up with, and then when Cecil would come home on leave or anything, music. It was music. And my dad used to say that he couldn't sing. He said, I can't sing a note. But he said, I sit there and I listen. And he said, if anybody goes off key, I know it. But I can't sing a note. So that was a big thing in our house, was music. Our own music. A big thing.
And so you play the accordion.
I learned to play, not well like my brother and sister, but I did learn. So if you want me to play the tune I first learned,